I'll take the liberty of introducing myself first, and then I'm going to let Jeff introduce himself because I don't know your full background. And I'll introduce the students as well. Actually, I'll introduce those students first. Tracy Williams and John Hawkins both have been students in my baking classes, and there's two others, Steve Peck and John Smith, the easiest name to remember, are at the front door right now, making sure everybody can get in. And it's a lot of fun to have students on board too. And we kind of joke it's a whole lot easier to get students to volunteer for beer-centered events, which is a good thing, you know. But actually, not to say some students are better than others, but all four of these students have helped me out with things before, and so they're pretty fantastic. Myself, actually I'm going to let Jeff introduce himself first. Is that all right with you? Yeah, is that okay?
I'm Jeff Sobolewski. I'm the Brewery Operations Manager for our Sustainable Brewing program here. We actually, as a footnote to your question, we have a class called Brew 160, which is style, sensory, and pairing, and we have that in here. It's all about beer styles and what food to pair it with. So this is a great spot for that as well. If you have any specific questions about beer, you know, in our program beyond what Cory gives us today, let me know. And also at the tail end, if anybody would like a tour of upstairs of our brewery facility, there's actually a group of students up there today doing a brew, and you could see them in progress.
Yeah. Cool, good deal. Again, I'm Cory. You can just call me Cory or Chef if you don't remember my name. My background is one that is started 20 years ago now. I went to culinary school when I was 17. You guys will get the really fast version. Culinary school when I was 17-ish, and then graduated in the late 90s. Worked in fine dining in and around the United States. So Cleveland, that's why we have Great Lakes up here. That's where I spent a good dose of my time. I worked in fine dining predominantly, so most of what I've done is actually as a pastry chef, but I've also been an executive chef, so I've been on both sides of the kitchen. I worked for Michael Simon. I don't know if anybody knows the name, but he's one of the Iron Chef America guys. Back in 2007 to 2011, I did 17 episodes of Iron Chef America, so I was much younger, thinner, more beautiful back then. Still on in syndication. God bless syndication, because it does come on just to remind me just how much I've aged. Yeah, so I did a whole bunch of those episodes, and here shortly coming up, actually, I'm doing a thing on Food Network again. It's on March 18th. It airs. It's called the Spring Baking Championship. Most people forget it by then, but it's kind of one of those elimination shows. So we went and taped it back in September. And you do good, you keep going. You do bad, you get kicked off. One of those things. So. But my background predominantly, again, it was in the fine dining sector. And I, to be really honest, didn't come to actually enjoy beer until I moved back to Michigan again. I enjoyed beer in Cleveland, but I was a hard-working restaurant person, so I drank a lot of bourbon. And then really my enjoyment for beer actually started when I became a teacher again. We had an instructor. I worked in Muskegon who taught the brewing class. It was not like a brewing program like here, but we had a small brewing class in Muskegon as well, and he liked to talk about beer like nonstop. So I got sucked into it and really enjoyed it. So today we're going to take a little bit of perspective on beer and cooking. And as we go on, we don't have a super huge group, so it's okay to totally ask questions as we go. Usually if there's 40 in here, I'll say, hold the questions till the end. But as we go on, if you have questions, if you have ideas or experiences that you have also utilized in cooking, we can go through that. We can take a look at the recipes, and we're just going to touch base on them really fast, just the four that we're going to do today. So the first one that we're going to do is the lager and cheddar biscuits. And we'll get kind of approached on that. And again, all the beer styles that I picked out, I tried to pick out a few different types stylistically. Even I used IPA, which we'll talk about at length, because for a long time I thought don't ever use IPA cooking, and I'll tell you why right here. Then we have a porter that we're going to use for the bacon and glazed nuts. This one was a recipe. This is an older recipe of mine from 2008. I actually entered it into it used to be only almonds. I used to do consulting for the California Almond Board, and this was a recipe that I entered in the recipe contest. That I got second. They gave me $200, and the other person got to go to the Super Bowl. So, but it's still really good. The next one after that is going to be the IPA pickled vegetables. That one, of all 4 of the recipes, for me it was the most interesting one because it broke a few rules that I always used to have about cooking with beer. And again, we'll touch on that. And then the last one is going to be the amber ale and sesame glazed shrimp. And we're going to do those kind of to order, so that'll be the last one so that everybody can get some. If you have any major food allergies or something along those lines, hopefully we don't, but there is shrimp on the menu and there are nuts on the menu too. So just to kind of throw those out there, just to be aware of. Okay. So Jeff is going to go ahead and talk about the beers that he's going to pour. Probably many that you're familiar with, but stylistically they match up really well with the recipes.
Right, so as Cory and his students hand out samples, we're going to also sample a beer of the matching style that is reviewed and kind of well known as a pretty true to style, even though all of these aren't porters were originated in England. Well, this one was made in Comstock, just a few things down the road, but it's a really great example of the style. You all have this form in your folders there. Give you a little bit of style background and details on the brews. Again, you can ask me for more questions beyond that if you like, but I'm really excited about the IPA thing because I kind of share the common thing with Cory. It's like, what are you going to put in IPA?
Does anybody else, like, I will just jump, like, has anyone else had terrible success with trying to cook with IPAs? Anybody ever had good success with cooking with IPAs?
We've never cooked with an IPA.
What's that?
I would never use an IPA.
Right, neither would I, because hops are good in beer. Only, you know, and I actually tried to make a hop ice cream once. It was the terrible, most worst thing I've ever made. I mean, it was awful. It was really, really bad. So we'll get into that, and that one will be a lot of fun when we get there. So I think the first one we're going to start off with then is going to be the cheddar biscuits, and we are going to bake these off to order. Or actually, for everybody, I'm going to go ahead and turn the oven on really quick here. And it is warmed up, so it's not like we have to go through the whole process. No, we will not need a rolling. These are going to be scoop biscuits. So we got our oven warming up, and it's already at 250, so it won't take too long. So we're going to make a drop-style biscuit, and if anyone's ever made drop-style biscuits, you know you can get away with a little bit more on those. So we have 2 major styles of biscuits, right? We have the rolled style, and then you have drop style. And with the drop style, it's called drop style because you use a scoop, right? And we're going to use the red ones, not the black ones. This scoop has a bigger biscuit. And with that methodology, it means that we can put a little bit more liquid into the product. So if we can put more liquid and we're trying to actually evoke beer flavor out of it, that means we have the opportunity of actually adding more beer flavor into it. You could do a rolled biscuit, but with rolled biscuits, you're kind of confined to the point where you need to hit a certain texture of that biscuit, right? If you guys made drop biscuits before, like short biscuits, right? They're pretty soft out of there, right? And they're a whole lot more simple, I think, too, to actually execute. But they're pretty soft along those lines. And so this actually allows us to utilize the softness of the biscuit to promote flavor, not just something that's really tender. So we're gonna go through a fun little process, and if you've done this one at home, good on you. But we're gonna actually use a food processor to make our biscuits. I have kept my butter cold. That is one thing that I definitely like to do when making biscuits. Has anybody ever used a food processor for biscuits or pie dough before? Yeah, pretty awesome, right? It's like when you do it once, you never actually want to go back to the old style. So we have our flour here. This is just good old all-purpose flour. And I have doubled this recipe, just so you guys know. So obviously, we're a larger group than just 8 little biscuits there. So I doubled this one, and we're going to make smaller ones. So we're going to get our flour into the food processor here first. If you don't have a food processor or don't want to use one, you can easily do this with 2 butter knives. You could do this also with just your hands, actually mealing it up into the flour itself. So what we're going to do here is called cutting the butter in. Now, it used to be that you used a pastry cutter, and if anybody knows what I'm talking about, it was like that U-shape with all the little blades, and you pressed everything in. And they work. But if you have a food processor, these work better. That's really kind of the long and the short of it. And so what we're just going to do is we're going to pulse this. And I'm going to put it into that bowl over there here in a second so you guys can actually see what it looks like. It doesn't take much. You can hear it. The butter's kind of tapping around in there. The butter will remain in its solid form instead of turning into a liquid in this case, right? You guys are all beer people, so you actually might like science. So we're going to talk a little bit of food science too. And one reason that we do that is that the butter pearls will remain whole and they won't get smashed into your biscuits as much. And that will allow the biscuits to hold, and as they bake, that butter melts out and ends up with a more tender biscuit, right? Now, I'm notorious for having bad relationships with food processors, so we'll make sure that we can open this guy up. If anybody does actually watch the Food Network show that I'm on, there's an epic scene in one of the episodes that I'm struggling mightily with food processing. It's pretty grand. I'm going to pulse this up just a little bit more. And we're looking for that butter to pretty much be gone. We don't really want any large chunks of the butter in there, but we want it to be a pretty fine powder. Should I want to grab those and just throw on rack? Thank you very much. And you can see, good, I actually have it in the right spot. We have all the flour that's in here. The butter, I can feel it, it's in small pearls right now. And you can actually usually tell if you smashed up the butter too much. If you have smashed it up too much, when you squeeze it, it will stay in a clump. This usually breaks apart fairly easily, right? And this is, again, allowing our butter to stay whole at the same time. I got one chunk of butter there. It's always a good idea to kind of toss it around. So then I have a few other things, and we're going to talk about these too. I got a little bit of sugar. These you could add in if you wanted to while you did it on the food processor. I may have said that in the directions. I forgot to do it here. That was salt, sugar. This is a little baking powder. You'll notice there's always a good dose of baking powder inside of the drop biscuits as well. They need some to get some rise. Now, not in your recipe are the next two ingredients that I'm going to add. Why am I adding them? Well, when I was making this and I was putting everything together, I thought, wow, that really sounds good. So here's an example of what you can do. Right? You have a very basic format here. You have a very basic recipe, and it's really easy to add in ingredients that are dry and non-reactive. So what does that mean? Well, that means spices, basically, is what that means. So pepper, we can think of that. Black pepper isn't going to do anything other than add flavor. We're not going to get some weird reaction in here. We're not going to get anything crazy. So a little bit of black pepper. I really like caraway, like a lot, and I think caraway is delicious with beer too. I probably have a little bit more here than I need to add, so we'll add about 2/3 of that in there. And then we'll have our caraway in there too. So at this point, if you have things that you enjoy, one of my goals with this was to make sure that I didn't cover up beer flavor. At this point, I mean, you can add whatever you want. Any kind of dried herbs in here, even some fresh herbs would be really, really good. You know, if you wanted to change up the salt or use a little less salt, if you want to change the cheese, you really can. Just as long as the proportions of the dry and the beer, the wet beer, actually remain the same, then you're in a good shape. Again, we're working this around just a little bit. I'm going to toss my cheese in next. And I like to make sure, I like to make sure that the cheese is well coated with the flour at this point too. I would not add my cheese in after I've already mixed my dough. The reason is anytime you make a biscuit, the more you work it, the more tough your biscuit gets. And at this point, if I had my liquid in and mixed it, then I would add my cheese in and I would have to mix it again. And so that's extending that actual mixing period when the liquid is introduced into the flour. All right, so I'm gonna make just a little bit of a well here in the center. And we'll add in, this is a lager. This is Short's, what do they call it, Locals Light. That's what we had on tap here, which was actually surprisingly delicious. I hadn't had it in quite a while. And I like to, so you notice I added all my liquid into the center there. I like using my hands a lot. For a lot of reasons. One, I can feel like if there were any random butter chunks that were in there, I'm privy to that. And that way I can feel also if there's any dry spots of flour that are in there. You could use a mixer if you wanted to. A lot of times this stuff will end up getting overmixed if you kind of go that route. It's pretty nice. Right. I'm going to dry out a lot. So, if you end up with a little bit of dry matter, just like that, we can hit it with just a touch of water. I do want these to be pretty moist, and I did not give myself a little extra beer like I should have. So you notice there was dry on the top, right? Rather than lying to myself and saying it's going to be okay, rather than forcing it back in, which is going to end up with something tough, just add in a little bit of water, or if you have a little beer, because like if I was at home, I'd probably be drinking beer while I was doing this. You could add a splash into this, and this is the texture, there we go, that we wanted. This rather tacky mass that we have. Can you guys see that up there? Let me see if I can move my hands. I always screw this camera up. So you can see that stickiness, that sticky quality that we have. That's what you're looking for, okay? And I would not mix farther after this. This is done at this point, okay? So, John, you're here, and Steve, you're... Actually, John, you guys can both come over here. We're just going to scoop up some of these guys. So you guys want to share, you can use some trays. And just give them a little bit of space in between them, okay? There's some gloves right back there. It should be in the orange box. Cool. So we'll get those in the oven. They take about, we're doing a smaller size here, a larger size, and I wrote it down in a couple of ways down there at the bottom. I know, a big surprise that a pastry chef's got a lot of instructions about biscuits, right? So if you have an oven that's convection, it's going to cook faster. It's going to cook hotter. This oven is convection, and I've cooked in this one before. I know it cooks hot. So it's set at 350 right now at convection. If you just have, like at home, I just have a conventional oven, just a still normal everyday oven. I would bake these at 400 at home. If you're going small, like we have here, you could probably, these guys are going to take 8 to 10 minutes. I'm going to have you set a time. You have your phone on you. Excellent. Otherwise, I will forget as I'm talking. So they're going to take about 8 minutes or so, and we'll check them. They should be nice and golden brown, look fluffy, and ready to go. If you're at home, they're going to take 15 to 20 minutes if they're larger. And just be honest with yourself. Open them up. Are they nice and dark on the outside? Are they a little doughy still? How much longer do they need? You know, so you kind of have to speculate. Baking is not a perfect science. A science, yes. A perfect science, no, it is not. Our ovens dictate everything, really. And so we can have that. So always checking those guys out as they go in. So we're going to get those in the oven, then we'll be able to taste those. That's why we did those first, and then we'll take a look at the top. Yes?
You have to spice the peppers and caraway and put it on the recipe. What kind of quantity do you put?
Quantity. So for yours, I would say a teaspoon of pepper, ground pepper, and 2 teaspoons of caraway would be like in that zone, right? And really, you can kind of dictate that also with what spices you're using. If it's a strong spice that's really going to come through really strong, then you would want to use less. If it's something that's a little lighter, then you can use more. But really, the spices, you can have a lot of fun with it. And the cheese is the other one that you could have a lot of fun with. I did cheddar here, but you could very, very easily do Gruyere. How many we got there? 12, 24, lovely. And you could do Gruyere or something along those lines. I think those are pretty tasty and a little bit more robust. Yeah. And you can change that up pretty easily. With the spices, smoked paprika would be awesome in there. I like chipotle a lot, like ground chipotle. You just gotta watch out because it's hot. Or you could use like mixed spices too, would really work out really easily. And the biscuits work great. They work great for sandwiches, just served as soup. I mean, you can just have them straight up. The key for me with biscuits is, and this is why we're doing it this way, is to have them when they're still warm and like within at least an hour or 2 of baking. Has anybody ever had a biscuit that's like a day old and it's bad? I mean, it's really bad. You may as well like grind it up or throw it in a soup or feed it to the dog or something. But they can be really bad. So that's one of the reasons why we did it this way, right? I actually thought about, come in and bake them off in the morning, but they're just not as good that way. So, but the biscuits you can have a lot of fun with, pretty damn tasty. All right. Any other questions about biscuits? Nada? Cool. Let's do the nut portion there, the beer and bacon glazed nuts. Steve, you want to grab this one? You can take it back to the community. We like to clean as we go. We're just going to leave them in 8 minutes. We'll pull them out. Oh, you want to scoop them out? We can bake them off and we can have some too. That's what we like to do with leftovers. This is why we actually do this, is so we can eat too. All right, so for the beer and bacon. So this one is a pretty straightforward recipe. And when I initially made this recipe, let's see if we can get this guy unlocked. There we go. When we initially made this recipe, the approach with it was something that is salty and sweet, delicious, and insanely simple to make, right? And the first time that I made this, there was like 6 or 7 different steps and stages, and I thought this is really, no one's gonna make this because of this exact variation. But in the end, we decided, and this was actually one that I tested at home in 2008. It was just my wife and I, and we ate so many of these. So it's really, really simple in its approach. So we have some really basic ingredients. We have a porter. Any one that you like to choose is fine. And I'll tell you why I actually use this set of ingredients. 1, because bacon is delicious. 2, because almonds I had to use. But in this case, I actually mixed the nuts. Today we have almonds, we have pecans, and we have walnuts. I actually think it is better than the original recipe. The walnuts that are in there are really pretty exceptional. Salt, pepper, and then brown sugar. So I didn't add a lot of spices to this. If you'll notice, there are variations and notes at the bottom. If you want to change that, you can. The reason I actually didn't do that in the beginning is, 1, I wanted to taste the almonds. And then I actually thought about changing them up for this class a little bit, but it didn't make sense because we're cooking with beer. So the more ingredients you put in, the less you taste the other ingredients, right? And it just becomes kind of this conglomeration. Now, porter kind of inherently, to me anyway, has black pepper and brown sugar notes already in it, so it kind of worked out for me, right? It has those smoky qualities that brown sugar or molasses kind of plays in there, and pepper to me always has a very kind of earthy quality, an earthy spiciness to it. It's not like sharp spiciness, and I think that you find that not just in porters, but a lot of dark beers kind of have that inherently, and so that's what we have here. So it's a pretty simple process. Got going on high. Induction burners are fun. I have a little bit of chopped up bacon that's already here. You can use any that you'd like. And then we have the salt, we have the pepper, the brown sugar, and the stout, or sorry, the porter in this case, that are all going to go into the pan together. Now, here's a trick that's not on your recipe. This stuff likes to overflow like nobody's business. So if you'll notice, this isn't a huge recipe, but this is a very big pot. There's a reason. It's so it can evaporate and give it time, right? This is one of those tricks that you find out at about midnight when you're making these at home, usually when it's all over your stove at that point. So we have our beer that's in here. Let this heat up just really quick. Then we're going to add in our brown sugar. I did choose brown sugar over white sugar. I think it adds more flavor, just kind of inherently a nice round flavor into it. And I thought it was pretty tasty. I'm actually going to add this more in here. So when I did these upstairs, and this one I did make ahead of time. We already have them portioned up. It smells awesome. This is one of my favorite beers. This is like, reminds me of living in Cleveland all over again. It smells so good. It's really captivating. I did choose this beer just because it's really nice. Also, I made these ahead of time, and you can see it. You guys see it on the step back. See how it's coming up?
Oh, yeah.
So you got to watch it. It likes to boil over. You can pull it over. When we add our sugar in, into this, it will help bring it back down a little bit. Okay, so it won't erupt quite as easily on there. Now, pretty easy to get this to come back down. What you're looking for then is a medium heat after it comes up to its full boil, and that's already dissolved. The bacon helps in a couple of ways. Has anybody ever made peanut brittle before? So if you've made peanut brittle or any kind of nut brittles, a lot of times there's butter that's added to it. Butter is what? Butter's fat. Right? But it's delicious fat, and it tastes a whole lot different than butter does. So we can add in our bacon at this point too. So the first time I made this, I cooked my bacon off first, because inherently that's what you should do, right? Like, what am I going to add this soggy bacon in there? So what happens as this cooks, that bacon then becomes permeated with the brown sugar, and after it goes back into the oven, then it caramelizes again. So it kind of is like a double cooking, right? And it becomes super, super crispy. This process the one lengthy part of this process is the time that it takes, okay? So we're bringing this guy up to a boil first. And we'll add in our salt, because salt's good, especially with nuts. These nuts have not been toasted. That is important. Why haven't they been toasted? because I'm gonna cook them again. Yeah. The first time I made them, I cooked my bacon. I toasted my nuts because as a pastry chef, like these are all the steps you're supposed to take before doing these things. And guess what happened when I put them in the oven? They burned so bad. The whole house was smoky. It was pretty gnarly. Like I said, it took a few tries to get this correct. So we bring this up to a boil, and it needs to go for about 10 minutes. Now, it's really going to depend on the size of your pot that you have. And after it simmers for a while, then we're going to add our nuts into that. Now, we can talk about the nuts as well here together. This does take a little while in the oven after it's done. So if you can see there, you spread your almond mixture, and we have one of these really cool things called a Silpat, which is a silicone mat. No, I don't expect anybody to have those if you don't. A piece of aluminum foil with some spray will work okay. These things are pretty sweet though. You can get them for a relatively affordable amount. You can see this is coming up to a boil, and it's not erupting as badly as it did before. One thing that you want to avoid is going in there and stirring like crazy. As a chef also, that's another thing I like to do is interfere. So I would get in there and it would rapidly come up to the top. If it does, again, start to boil over a little bit, and you can see it's coming up, you can just turn it down the heat a little bit. And what we want to do is have that heat kind of slowly dissipate and remove some of the water, and we're concentrating the sugar, we're concentrating that extra kind of roasty qualities of the barley or the malts that are in there too. And that's what we really like. I'll let the timer. It's a good thing in this case. A little bit longer. We'll go 4 more minutes. You guys want to see him? So they're pretty blonde right now, right? I'm more of a brunette guy, so we're going to leave those in there for a while. Well, we're going to let those go down. My wife is brunette, so it's safe to say. So this is coming. And you can see now it's kind of mellowed out. It isn't boiling over like crazy anymore. And we're going to let that work down. Now, in the case of the nuts, I think that walnuts, pecans is my favorite caramelized nut. I just love pecans. It's like inherently, they taste like dessert already. And then, so I took some of these to my wife the other day because I made them a couple days ago for you guys to try. And one thing we did have in here that she said she missed was whole almonds. The sliced almonds are awesome because they give you this like thin crispiness that's kind of in there. The whole almonds give you that like pop when you bite into them, right? So they're a little bit different. Walnuts are a little softer, pecans are softer too. You could use whatever you want. Peanuts would be really, really good in here. I almost threw peanuts in, and then I remembered, hey, there's kind of like a lot of peanut allergies, so I didn't add peanuts into there. But they're really inexpensive too, and they work really well. So we've had this going for a little bit. You guys smell it already? Yeah. Oh yeah, it's pretty delicious. So if you'll notice when I stir it, it tends to foam up. This is so much better than I was making your batch upstairs. Your batch was, I filled the pan like 2/3 of the way full, and it was constantly on and off and on and off, and I thought, oh my God, I'll get it done with this. And then I remembered if you do a lot smaller, it works out pretty well. So we're working that down. You can smell the bacon too. That's kind of the fun part that's in there. Bacon has that smoky quality to it, but it also has kind of the porky quality to it, which is really, I think, pretty tasty. I'm gonna set these over here for when the biscuits come out.
And Chef, the bacon, did you pre-cook it at all?
No. So it was like straight out of the package, cut up just like that. And again, this kind of relates back to, I wanted this to be as simple as possible. Literally everything was just dumped into that pan. Like those lines. It might even be past the little 4 minutes. So, see it's coming up. And again, it's starting to coat my spatula a little bit. And that's what we want. Now, after we bake this, the reason that it doesn't get super sugary and really, really hard like glass is because we have that fat from the bacon that's in there. It's just like when you're making griddles. It's necessary to have that little bit of fat so it busts it up and makes it a little bit more tender. Okay.
Is the foaminess in that dish a big part of that?
Initially, yes, it is. Yeah, that carbonation that's actually caught in there, and then when you cook it, the carbonation is released out of there. Absolutely, a huge part of it. And I think too, the body, like that, the porter has so much like it's kind of thick, right? It's pretty viscous, and it has that body that retains it. And so also when you're heating it, you're making steam, and it wants to retain that steam instead of just like water just lets it go. It wants to hold on to it, and so that's why we have a lot of that That kind of goes.
Any residual sweetness in a beer comes from the yeast types of sugar that yeast can't keep, they can't consume. So that stuff is left in the beer and attributes to mouthfeel and things like that as well.
Absolutely. It's interesting, you know, so that was something I didn't know about beer, and after I learned it, there was a lot of things that I learned about bread because of that too. So we use different kinds of sugar in bread now if we want an inherently sweeter bread. So it's kind of one of those interesting things, what I was always told when you make bread, put a little bit of sugar in there because you want the yeast to rise. That's total garbage because yeast is sugar is a disaccharide, and yeast really love to eat monosaccharides, so single units of sugar, so you end up with bread that's sweet, but not necessarily, the yeast didn't grow a lot. But if you add a little bit of, like if you're a home brewer, malt syrup, we use malt syrup in one of the recipes, like in our beer bread we use a Pilsen malt syrup, and oh my god, it's just like, it will grow super, super fast on that day, so. Wow, they're so close, but they're not there yet, still probably another 3. All right, so at this stage, I do like the at this stage, we're going to add in all of our nuts, all at one time. And we're going to cook these guys a little bit too. Now, this obviously takes a little while in the oven, so I went ahead and made this for y'all already. So students, if you want to start handing out the nuts there, you can just toss them on a tray. At least one for everyone, with more after that too. And you guys get to have this and beer at the same time too. Steve, if you want to help hand out, or actually Janine, you want to help hand out these, those two can take care of that.
Should we talk about porter for just a second?
The paddle of your spatula.
Yeah.
Is it special?
It isn't to me, but I guess so, yeah. So it's a silicone rubber spatula. So it's a high heat spatula, and I can leave it kind of in the boiling liquid for an indefinite time. I think the heat limit is between 450 and 500. So if you go past that, I don't know what you're doing anyway. But yeah, so it's a little bit more flexible. So we call them high heat spatulas. They're silicone based. Sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No sweat. So porters came around in the mid-1700s. Back then, you know, it's a lot of still about the economics of brewing. And so brewers would take a bunch of grain, mash it in, rinse it, throw it into the boil kettle, and then finish the first brew that way. And then they would actually run more water to get a second running through, which is a lighter body, lighter color, weaker, and sometimes they'd even do a third running. But over in Europe, the working class really appreciated after a long work week or work day, the strong one. And so they named this style after a very common working class person in Europe, the porter. And as you'll notice, it's very robust. It's got maybe some caramely or toffee notes to it. There's some little bit of residual sweetness, but it is not super bitter or roasty or ashy like a stout would be. A stout is in the same category, but it would be called a stout porter to know the two differences.
So just to let you know, your biscuits is taking longer because I forgot to push the convection button.
Okay.
So, you know, again, be honest with yourself and with your students. All right, so the nuts have been in here for a little while too, and I like to let them simmer for just a bit. And again, they kind of get glazed. Now we're not looking for something that is caramelized fully, right? So it won't be super, super sticky, but it's going to be shiny is kind of what we're looking for. We're just going to let them simmer away just a little bit, and then I'm going to toss them on this pan, and then at that point they would go into the oven. So did you guys all get to try the nuts? Ooh, nice.
Are you trying to boil down the liquid?
Yeah, exactly. Bring it down a little bit. So what I'm looking for is something that, you know, when we talk about the magic of TV, I actually want you guys to see this happen because I think it's important. You're looking for something that coats the nuts, that will cling to them a little bit. Because what would happen if it's not cooked down far enough, and I put it on the silpat, all the liquid will slough off of the nuts that we have in there, and then you end up with a pool of liquid at the bottom that will caramelize around it, but not on it, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what we're doing here.
It's kind of the same consistency as peanut brittle.
What's that?
Kind of the same consistency as peanut brittle.
Similar, but it's not quite as firm as peanut brittle would be there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's delicious. All right, so while that's simmering down, we're gonna move on into the pickled vegetables here real quick. I'm gonna try to get this placed right there, right? I'll see it best. There it is, okay. I told you I'm bad with this camera. It's the only one. See how, it makes no sense. Okay, so we're gonna do a few veggies here. Compost bucket, my IPA. This way, pass these ingredients over here. Here's the trick right there to successful cookery with IPA, and this is our vinegar. This over here. Beautiful, there we go. I don't know if you guys can see. Let's see, which way do I do? Actually, you can see it if I leave it just flat, right? You can see the bottom of the pan when I pull the spatula off. That's a really good sign. That means the liquid is becoming thick and it's not running back into the middle, which is what I'm looking for when I put them all over here too. So that's taken, after I added my nuts in, that's taken a few more minutes just to get those really well glazed. Again, I believe on your recipe it says 10 minutes. It's best to know what to look for, right? So looking for that glaze coating that's on there, that's really the integral part. And that's what allows you to get crispy. You can't see it probably from up there, but the bacon is kind of translucent at this point too. So it's really been cooked all the way through. Awesome. Oh, hush. Now we can just spread this out. That's my induction burger yelling. Sorry. It doesn't like it when you take the pan away. And then we spread this out, and then this would go into your oven and then get baked off. So we can slide this on the rack for right now. We're not going to take the extra 20 minutes to bake that one. Here. Here. These are nice and center. You guys want to pull off one of these and you can pop them on plates? I do have some. Features. Off with that one. Cool. All right. So we'll pass out the biscuits around, Jeff, if you want to do the lager too, or if you already have it. We can do that.
Got it out. This is a lager from Bell's called Lager of the Lakes. It's touted as a Bohemian Pilsner. Pilsner's origin is in the Pilsen region of Czechoslovakia, or the former Czech. Lagers are really a difficult style to make and make well because, as you can see, they're so very light and there's not a lot of hop presence in them. And they use a different type of yeast. It uses a cold fermentation project where all the ales will ferment on top of the beverage, and they use a warmer temperature to ferment. They ferment a little bit quicker. They produce different flavor characteristics, and a lager yeast actually ferments at the bottom of the vessel. You need to keep it at a cool temperature and take it slow because you don't want the lager yeast to work too fast, or they'll introduce all sorts of crazy sulfury compounds like rotten egg smell or natural gas and things like that in your beer. But the result, when made well, is a very transparent, clean, maybe a little touch of fruity esters, they would call it. And a lot of as far as the Czech Bohemian Pill style, is a function of the water that they use, because the different mineral composition of the water makes a big difference in your finished beer. And our students here are very cognizant of that, and they mix their own water chemistry for the beers they make upstairs. So this is a pretty darn good one.
What causes the beer to skunk when you buy it out of the stores?
Sorry, I didn't do that.
What causes the beer to skunk is what we called it.
Okay, skunk is a characteristic called light struck. It has to do with a compound both in the malt and in the hops when they mix with sunlight, it creates a chemical compound, I can't remember the chemical amount, but it makes it smell like a skunk. It can happen rather easily, and most beers are actually susceptible to that. If I took this beer outside, 30 seconds in the sun and brought it in, you would get that skunky taste on it.
That's short of time.
What's that?
That's short of time.
That quick. I've done it right at Bell's before. I'm like, hey, taste this beer. Stick it out and I'll try it again, kind of thing. It happens really quick. That's why most beers in brown bottles and the ones that don't, say a Corona or a Heineken, might have a taste naturally as part of the normal flavor profile of those beers, and they're kind of skunked on purpose. But then you ask about, am I taking too much time here, Cory?
No, not at all.
Okay, and
Nobody
then you
wants to
ask
make
about,
you
is that enough there, 10? I think that's enough. Yeah. Okay, and so you look on your shelf and you see a beer like Miller or a Miller Genuine Draft, and you go, well, that doesn't taste skunky. That's because they work with folks like a company right here in town called Calsec, and they make these hop extract products that they use in their beer that actually are fractions of hops that are not sensitive to light. And so those beers you can bake out in the sun all day and they stay light sail. They may not taste very well after a day in the sun, but in a nutshell, that's the answer. Is it's riboflavin, which is a B vitamin, and sunlight, and I don't know the compound in hops. You know what I'm saying? But genius in beer too. I'm not sure. What's the question? The hop compound that is part of the interaction process that skunks beer.
I think it's isohumulone.
Yeah, it probably is just the humulone, which is a fancy name for a hop acid. Its presence in hops. A little chemical reaction. Much like baking has a lot of chemical reactions.
Many of them.
Everybody get one?
Right, everybody got a biscuit? Y'all think they could have used a little bit more salt like I did? Oh, thank you. All right, so we are going to move on to the IPA pickled vegetables, as you can probably tell. I'm just cutting up some that I have here. I did prep these ahead of time and do them for you all. The reason that I did it is because pickled vegetables, when we think of pickled vegetables in this manner, really we make a hot marinade and then we pour it over the vegetables. So it's almost like a marinated vegetable. So anything marinated always tastes better in time, right? So the veggies that we have over here, I made on Thursday. So they've had 2 days to set in. And I tried them on the first day, and I actually tried them yesterday, and you could tell they had changed a lot already. And the veg that you guys have to try today is cauliflower, which is personally is kind of nostalgic for me. My grandmother used to win blue ribbons at the Ottawa County Fair in Oak Harbor, Ohio. That's where I was from. And she would win them with pickled vegetables, because they would do canning things. So it's a little bit nostalgic for me. My personal favorite one, Steve, I didn't have still. You're very attentive. Oh, you want it out of the way for pictures? Yes. Can I do that side? You're all good. No worries, you guys are fine. So one of my favorite pickled vegetable of all time was cauliflower, personally. And I think it's really good. So you guys have, anyway, cauliflower, the colored bell peppers, so I think it's red, or yellow and orange rather, and then carrots are in there as well. So I have a couple of different ones. Oh, onions too. But I have some turnips in here. What's that? Oh, yes, there's some garlic in those too. But I have some turnips here, onion, radish, and to be very honest with you, why do I have these? It's because that's what we had. So if you think about like when you're pickling vegetables too, that's the idea. Use what you have. Now, I have some feelings about some vegetables that are pickled. Green vegetables, I personally don't enjoy pickled. That's my take on it, right? People like pickled green beans. If you do, make them great. For me personally, anything that turns brown and gets mushy kind of like that, I'm just not a huge fan of. That's just my take on it. Again, if that's something that you enjoy, then go for it. So I've cut up some of my veggies, and I do like to have them rather chunky because I like the crunch that they supply, right? The finer that you cut them, the more likely the The acids and the heat are going to break the cell walls down and make them flimsy and mushy. Even if you have them large, they're always going to be soft, but at least they will retain something. Again, that's why I love cauliflower so much, because it always retains its crunch, and carrots as well. I don't think I quite need that whole onion in there. So we have the turnips in pretty large pieces in there. I love turnips as another thing that I grew up with. I used to eat them raw all the time when I was a kid. I was a weird kid. So we have some of our carrots in there too. And again, it's going to supply really that super nice crunch, a little bit of the sweetness. We're just prepping our veg. Red pepper, we'll just chop this bottom piece into. Radishes, again, another thing that I grew up with and really enjoyed. I had a very eclectic childhood. Some large pieces there. And then for the onion, this is a huge onion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a few wedges and then cut it into pieces. That's probably plenty of onion that you have in there. One thing that you have to remember is whatever pickling liquid that you do is going to have flavor that goes into the vegetables, but then as it sits and melts, the vegetables are going to affect one another too. So you'll be able to, like when you taste the cauliflower today, I guarantee that you can taste the peppers in there or the onions in there as well, right? Because everything begins to kind of meld together and become pretty interesting. All right, so we have our vegetables that we're going to use for our pickling. Now, the pickling liquid is when it all becomes kind of interesting. There we go. That over high heat. Excellent. So if you look at your recipe, there's a very simple ratio that you have there. And one thing that I want to talk about is the ratio from the pickling liquid compared to the vegetables. Quite frankly, it doesn't matter. What you're looking for is to have enough liquid to cover up your vegetables, right? That's the really important part. So you can make all of this and throw one carrot stick in and it's fine. But what you'll run into is if you don't have enough to at least cover your vegetables, and of course I picked like the small container, then you're going to run into the problem that they're not fully permeated with all the flavor. So let's talk about IPA really quick. IPA is what? I mean, what flavor do we think of when we think of IPA? Hops, right? Strong, bitter, absolutely. But IPA also has the beautiful part about the aroma, right? So you have the citrus, you have the pine. For me, I always smell mango because I always smell pine trees when I smell mango. So, you know, those tropical kind of fruits that you smell in there. So what do brewers do to combat the bitterness of a lot of hops? What do they add to this? Is one reason why I love Two Hearted, because to me it has a huge malt bill, right? It has a lot of maltiness. So as I'm thinking about this, traditionally we have some sort of a base liquid. Usually you'll have a vinegar, you'll have water, actually, and then you'll have sugars that you compile all together, and then you make a pickling liquid. Well, in our case, we still need the vinegar because we need the acidity. So we have 3 parts or 3 cups of the IPA here. You have 2 cups of cider vinegar. Now, after I wrote this recipe, I thought, man, it'd been really cool if I used malt vinegar. So if you wanted to use malt vinegar, it'd be just fine in there. I will say the cider vinegar does not trump the hops. Like, you can still smell it working. What does balance the hops is this guy right here. So this is a Pilsen malt that I used in bread baking, so it's malt syrup. And so just like brewers would use to tone down bitterness in an IPA or something along those lines, I'm going to use it in the pickling liquid as well. And it also adds, I mean, obviously it's going to add sweetness to it, but the cool thing about it is it doesn't add as much sweetness as sugar adds. Malt, when you taste it, yes, it's sweet, but it doesn't deliver the sweetness to the palate in a way that just, you know, granulated sugar or brown sugar, something like that does. Another thing that I like to do, and if you look at that recipe again, there's a 3-to-1 ratio on there. So in this case, it's 3 parts IPA, 2 parts cider vinegar, and 1 part malt syrup. Yes.
So the malt syrup, where do you source that?
This malt syrup I got actually from, I think it was from Bell's, their home brewing area. They have malt syrups that are over there. Now, if you didn't want to go through that whole process, like you can go to a homebrew store, they usually always have, and they probably have a myriad of different types of malt syrups that are there. You can buy just good old malt syrup from like Meyer carries malt syrup in little glass jars. It's very ambiguous, like it doesn't, you don't really know what that means necessarily. But to this extent, I don't know that it really matters that much. You're just looking for that kind of round sweetness that malt can provide from that. And of all the recipes we did, this was certainly the most interesting one of the bunch. So would you guys mind handing out the pickled veg?
Did you say this is Pilsner malt?
This is a Pilsen malt, yep, absolutely. And I think probably that's, I am not a brewer, but I think that's probably one of the most common types of malt syrups that are And then I'm just gonna boost this thing super high and we'll get it rolling. We're gonna cover this up and then we'll set it in the back. They're handing out the pickled veggies. We did strain off the liquid from this. And here's another cool thing. In restaurants forever we used to make pickled vegetables, not with IPA, just good old pickled vegetables. And we would dump gallons and gallons and gallons of this stuff right down the drain, right? Because whatever, it's just a marinating liquid. And then one day, one of our cooks, to be honest, not a very good cook, had the idea of, hey, what if we use that in the vinaigrette? And so we dumped it into a dressing, and it was ridiculous. It was so good, and half of the vinaigrettes that we made from there on were made from like shallot pickling liquid or onion pickling liquid, because it already had all that flavor in there. So if you take this guy, and you took about, I don't know, I like my vinaigrettes pretty bitey. So if you took 2 parts of this and mixed it in with about 1 part of oil, just kind of whisk them together really quick, you'd have a really great vinaigrette along those lines. And it's pretty delicious. And it has, this one also, I mean, it carries a lot of the vegetable flavor, but it also has a little bit of the bitterness and some of the hoppy kind of aromas that go along with it.
All right, so you're also getting a sample right now of Bell's Two Hearted Ale, which I assume everybody's probably heard of this one. It's one of the most popular beers in the country. Bell sells a ton of it. But why is it called an India Pale Ale as an IPA? And the answer to that was it didn't originate in India, but in the 1800s there were British soldiers stationed in India. And hops were partially used in beer right from the beginning, not just for their flavor and aroma, but because they have a preservation quality to them. So if you hop up your beer, it'll make it fresh all the way from that long boat trip from Europe to India, and then thus the India Pale Ale. There's a lot of diversity and breaking off of this style in America. It's kind of been Americanized. But again, this one's pretty balanced. Usually has a lot of hop aroma and flavor, a fair amount of bitterness to it, and some foam in the pan, just like that.
Just like that.
Just like that.
It will boil over on you too.
Brian, you said these were made on Thursday?
Those were made on Thursday, yes.
The longer you keep them, the mushier they get.
They will start to get softer, yeah, in time. How are they right now? Do they still retain a crunch? Yeah. Are they good? Yeah. So, no. Is anybody a health inspector in here? Okay. Here's the deal with pickled vegetables. The health inspectors will tell you this is not technically a pickled fermented vegetable. This is a marinated vegetable, right? And they're right. This really is. It's called a quick pickle. It's a good day. So it's a quick pickle, and so really what they're going to recommend is you can't leave it in your fridge any longer than 7 days. Now, that said, that's your house. You check on it and see what you think in 7 days. I think they reach their best peak at about 10 days. That's my humble opinion on that. All right. And if you find that you really want a little bit more hop flavor in there, you can feel free to kind of switch up that ratio too. That's what it smells great when it's first made. You can feel free to switch up that ratio and increase the IPA too. Vinegar. I actually thought after I made it that, man, this would be really good if it was about 4 parts IPA, a little bit less vinegar, and the same amount of malt. That was just my personal taste. But it's really easy to fluctuate, and I love working in kind of that ratio balance so that I know, I mean, when I talk about 1 part, you can go by volume, you can go by weight. So this is just, the cup was 1 part, right? You can just do a cup of each and along those lines. And, you know, we had a discussion like, hey, what would you use this for other than just kind of munching on? And for me, I would use this for like a jardiniere for like a beef sandwich or something. I think it would be, I guess I'm not gonna use that one anymore. I think it'd be pretty tasty. You know, you have that sourness, but you have the kind of bitiness of the beer that's in there too. I also think, as I started to think about it, you could do this with a lot of different beers, but really IPA might actually be one of the best beers to use this for because it's the only one that can, I mean, you have vinegar. Vinegar is huge, right? Vinegar is just beer gone bad anyway. So it's like, it has this big flavor. So how can we kind of combat that? Well, if you're gonna have something that is gonna be able to withstand or hold up to that vinegar flavor, I think it needs to be kind of along those IPA range. Anybody have any questions about that one?
What would happen if you put it hot cover?
I didn't think about that, like if you wanted it more hoppy. So here's what I thought, and again, I am not a brewer, but if you had, and the hop that jumped into mind was a more subdued one, is it Fuggle? Fuggle hops, is that the hops that are pretty mellow? And so if you have that, and does anybody know what a microplane is, like a zester? So if you have that, and you have one of those little Fuggle pellets, and you actually grate it just a little bit into it, you can probably get a little bit more of that hop aroma. And at that point, it's getting less of the bitters and more of the aroma because you're adding it off the heat, or you can even do it when it was cold and actually add it off the heat too. Kind of like when you're, you know, when IPAs are made, when they add it after the fact, it's called? Wet hopping? Dry hopping, the other one, sorry. So adding that dry hopping in and picking up more of the aroma to it like that. So if you wanted to retain even more of that hops in, that's what I would do. I would be very judicious when I did it though. Because hops, like, yeah, I mean.
You've never put a hot pellet in your mouth and chew on it.
I
regret that.
Yeah, that's what I did one time.
I
I don't recommend it ever. It's terrible. And that's kind of like when we made that hop ice cream. That's what I did. I threw like just one pellet in, and I'm like, oh, this will be great. It's horrendous. Really terrible.
But as you're experimenting with this recipe, you know, IPAs some have hops that are tropical in flavor, or citrusy, or herbal, or piney, and you can kind of choose your beer to kind of accent and change the flavor of this marinade.
Absolutely, yeah. And you can think about too, the combination of vegetables is going to affect the overall flavor, right? Onion inherently and garlic inherently have a strong flavor, and so they're going to swoop in. So if you really want something that's like, if you really wanted probably a great example of really good hoppiness would just be go all carrots and just do pickled carrots with it, because carrots, I mean, they have a sweetness to them, they have a flavor to them, but it's not intrusive like the allium family is, like garlic and shallots and onions are and stuff like that. You know, even as I'm making these things for you guys, I'm kind of learning and thinking about those as well. And I think that could help out bring out more of the hops. Not necessarily adding more hops, but adding less of something else. If that makes sense. I'm going to try to do a two-pan magic trick here. Let's see what's up. You might be able to go with just one. All right. Questions about those? About anything thus far? Has anybody had, I'm going to ask you a question, and I already did once. Has anybody had any other luck using IPA in food? Nada? There's some desserts I thought about using it in. We'll see if that ever happens. All right, so we're
Like
gonna.
what dessert?
What's that?
Like what dessert?
I think that really caramely. So like, we always talk about, when we talk about, you guys are getting into the mind of a chef, so it could get really messy in here soon. So when we talk about, whenever we talk about IPAs or double IPAs, there's something that's always talked about, like tropical fruit notes and things like that. As a pastry chef, I never get enough of that tropical fruit note. Like, yes, sometimes there will be things blended into it, or sometimes I can pick up on hints, but I'm used to desserts, like when there's a pineapple dessert, you know it's a pineapple dessert, right? So could there be a pineapple dessert that has IPA introduced into it, like with brown sugar or malt syrup already in there and deglazing and glazing the pineapple with that? I think would be pretty delicious. So there's my thought process on that. All right, let's get into the shrimp recipe here. If I got that one, I always have recipes hanging out. And the first thing that we're going to do is just take care of a little bit of mise en place here, just some vegetable work. So if you'll notice there at the bottom, it has some hot peppers. We just have some jalapeno. Nothing crazy. If you don't like hot peppers, guess what you can do? You can leave them. You don't have to put them in, and that would be okay. You're not going to lose anything on those ones. I leave the seeds in. So we're going to serve these, and you guys are actually going to come up here and serve yourself when we do this. If you don't like hot pepper, just avoid the jalapeno. I'm not going to put it into the cooking pan, so it won't pick up a lot of heat in there, okay? But I am going to use it to garnish. All right. We have some jalapeno there. Excuse me.
And pickling is certainly a great way to get me to eat my vegetables.
It really is, and really you're not adding that much to it. That's one of the things like at restaurants, it's like, how can you take a product from A to B without spending a lot of money but making it better? There's a reason you see a lot of pickled vegetables these days, is because it's not all that expensive, and at the end of the day, you've made something a lot more tasty than it was probably in the first place. So I have a little bit of scallion or green onion. Yes, it's a great way to utilize scraps or vegetables that are starting to go. Not moldy or gross, but like, you ever had a carrot that's hung out in the refrigerator too long, you pick it up, it's all like, not a carrot, right? So, it's a great way to use things like that, exactly. Alrighty. We got a little bit of scallion. Could you give me one of those small paper plates, please? Thank you very much. And this is going to be the garnish for the very end. Use some jalapeno. Probably won't use all that. No, I'm good. Let's stick them on here. And then we're going to do some cilantro too. So this one is kind of a fun one because it takes a little bit of a Asian approach, and no, amber beer is not super popular in Asia. A lot of lagers. It's hot, especially Southeast Asia. All right, cool. And with cilantro, you can use the entire stem. It's not like you have to remove the stems or anything like that. Delicious all the way from top to bottom. Is anybody a super cilantro hater in here?
Oh, Peter, I love it.
Do you get the soap quality? I promise I will put that heavily on 1.5 of the toast, okay? Yeah, so there's an inherent gene that you can actually get that cilantro tastes like soap to you, like Dawn soap to some people. What's that?
Must be why my wife don't.
Yeah, there's some people that just like, it tastes like soap. Okay, and I didn't believe it at first, and then I was pretty wrong. Okay, cool. That over here, grab this. Oh, I need one of these. Did I include? I did not. This is one thing I grabbed and I remembered from the pantry. You want to write limes down on your recipe. Your recipe would be delicious without them. It would be more delicious with them. Okay, we're going to squeeze a little bit of lime juice on there. It'll make it pretty tasty. Steve, get rid of this board for me, please. Thank you very much. These are yeah. Alrighty. So we're gonna get 2 pans. Actually, no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We're gonna do 1 pan. We have our shrimp. They've already been peeled and deveined. I've had my pan on relatively high heat there. Not relatively high. It's as high as this one will go. These electric burners are awesome, but sometimes they don't get super screaming hot. This. So we have our amber ale, soy sauce, sesame oil, sesame seeds, and malt syrup here. And I have the sesame oil. If you're not familiar with sesame oil, it has an extraordinary, especially the roasted sesame oil, very, very strong flavor, right? If you don't like it, you can leave that out. That's kind of okay too. For our purposes today, we are going to use it. And we're going to create a glaze in the pan first, and then we will actually add the shrimp into that glaze. So it's kind of like what we did with the nuts a little bit, right? Not quite as much because we don't need to do Alright, so we've got our amber ale in there too. And we have our soy sauce. I'll introduce. The soy sauce actually came, so this idea really came from upstairs when we make beer bread, we use malt syrup in it and we use actually amber ale because I think amber ale across the board to a lot of different varietals, especially if it's a low hopped one, which most of them are, that is a very mild hoppiness to it, makes ridiculously good bread. We will take all of the water out completely, remove it, 1,000 grams of water, we just take it out and replace it with beer. And it comes out and you actually have like a very beer forward flavor in that. And we also will add the malt syrup in place of the sugar that would normally be there. Now sometimes the dough is pretty sticky. I did not print off our beer bread recipe for you guys, sorry. You gotta come to school for that one. But it's really, really, really good. I think Tracy, is she in here? She's gave us, Tracy's probably doing all the dishes and stuff, but she's working with her. But it turns out really, really well. Malt syrup's fun flavor too. So we added that in here, and we're going to create this glaze for our shrimp here. Add, I almost forgot it. Sesame oil. I'm going to put every bit of it in there. And with the sesame seeds, I'm going to add about half, and then I like, because I'm a chef, I like to sprinkle things on top of stuff when it comes out. And we'll add that onto it after it comes out. You can see this is wanting to foam up too, but we have a relatively large saute pan, so we can get away with a little bit more here. And if it does, you'll slide it on over, let it go down for a second. You guys smell it? I don't know if you can or not, but yeah, the sesame is like pretty robust in there. If you want it to the beer flavor to be a little bit more forward, you can certainly add less sesame oil to it or even leave it out entirely. That'll be pretty good as well. So we do want to let this get a little bit sticky. You know what, in the meantime, would you mind pouring this for them right now? Sure. And we can taste that. This is going to take a second, so we're just going to fill the space with some fun stuff here. It's pretty easy to fill the space. It's not difficult, you know.
So just about everybody in the world has amber colored ale, amber being the color that you see in the glass here. This style of amber is pretty uniquely American, but it goes beyond pale ale and becomes more focused on the malt. They use these barley kernels that they stew to caramelize the sugars, and they call them caramel malts. Some people call them crystal malts, which gives it a more depth of flavor. You get some caramel flavors, you get some coffee flavors, some more rounded malt flavor. The American amber ale also has a good deal of focus still on the hops. There's a fair amount of hop presence and bitterness in this. And Bell's Amber is as good as I've had of an American amber style. I like this one a lot.
I think Bell's Amber was my introductory to, oh my god, beer can be insanely good. Why haven't I been drinking it? You know, it really was that, it was my gateway. Totally. It was that one, and honestly the Great Lakes makes one called, what was Gold. Dortmunder, thank you, Dan. Doherty Gold is like Cleveland's. They actually sell, at one point they were selling more at Doherty in Cleveland than Budweiser, which is saying something. I mean, it's crazy. Dortmunder Gold, and then their Christmas ale, which is drunk juice as far as I'm concerned. It's good, but holy cow.
Unfortunately, at the end of the semester, whatever we have left of student beers, we regrettably have to dump down the drain and get rid of it. And my lab assistant, Ellie, last semester, she and I brewed, it was her brew, she formulated a recipe for an amber ale and brewed it, and it was fantastic. And if any foresight at all, I would have saved some and served that to you. It turned out well.
On a high note, we are going through the process right now of being able to finally serve all of our beers in the restaurant here, which is pretty nice. Yes. They are coming up. I think they just passed officially at the city level, and then they have to go through the state law. So it's amazing how long some of those processes take, especially when you're doing it all with taxpayer money. I think that's really, nobody mentioned it, but come on, that's really the reality of it. All right, so you can see the glaze is pretty bubbly at this point. As soon as we introduce, I am waiting, because as soon as we introduce the shrimp, what's going to happen? It's going to get cold and it's going to fall down again, right?
Now you want you want your shrimp room temperature?
You can. I didn't. These are cold, but you could definitely do room temperature. Personally, I like to cook all meats from room temperature. Like even if you can just get a half an hour warm up on them or something like that, they cook a lot more evenly that way, and they tend not to. You don't have to overcook them because the center won't stay cold as long because it's 30 to 40 degrees higher than it would have been otherwise.
That's also a good point. A few of the beers, the porter, I actually kept out for a while because that has more flavorful profile and a little bit more on the temperature. Even the amber ale benefits from being in the 40 to 45 degree range.
All right. You see this is coming down a lot. It's not rising up very quickly anymore. That means a few things. One, the sugars are starting to condense in here and we're losing a lot of the water, which is a good thing. And also the flavors are going to condense too. So we're going to go ahead and add our shrimp in at this point. Now, people say, "Oh my God, you overcrowded the pan." We're not trying to get a sear on these, right? We're just trying to kind of gently cook them through. One way to do that is cover. Here's a restaurant trick for you. So we have shrimp done this way. This amber glaze could definitely be used for chicken, things along those lines. I don't know that I would cook beef in it, but that said, if you did the same kind of a glaze with it, cooked your beef already ahead of time, and then hit it with the glaze after the glaze was already made, I think it would be just fine. Just to get it kind of sticky. What could you serve this with? I mean, rice is kind of like a no-brainer because of the Asian roots that it has with some of the flavors in it. And especially you're going to end up with a little bit of sauciness to it, right? That's why you guys are serving yourselves. So you'll end up with a little bit of sauciness to it so it can cling to that. This would actually probably be ridiculously good with some of that pickled veg chopped right up and thrown in there, warmed through, and then serve that over rice would be really good too. So always stirring them, trying to get the ones up from the bottom that have already, mostly cooked, and then bring the ones from the top down. That's really what we're looking for. Paying attention, we don't really want any raw shrimp. It's not what we're after. If you'll notice, I didn't add a lot of salt to this. Any reasons why?
Is this soy sauce?
Soy sauce, yeah, absolutely. Soy is totally salt already. If you taste it and you want some more salt in it, that's fine. We do have a little bit. You can sprinkle. I got a couple more stirs. So, as we're wrapping up some of the last recipes here, or the last recipe, I guess, any questions about what we did today about beer and food, or I don't care, food in general is okay too. Like, hey, I made this and it was awful, why was it bad? We can get down to the source of that too. Or I made this and it was good. That's usually never the question.
So you still have the heat on, or did you turn it off?
The heat is still on, yeah. Can you hear that? That's the sound that it makes. If you leave the whisk inside of it, it makes the sound. Yep, so the heat's still on. We probably have one more turn still after this. There are a good deal of shrimp in there right now. It's looking pretty good. You can smell the malts in it a lot. I've used dessert, like beer and desserts a lot. I find that beer lends itself like incredibly well to desserts. And it's always, I always find myself reaching for the maltier ones, or, you know, stouts I enjoy in desserts, but I feel that they tend to take over. So like ambers and things like that in desserts I would use a lot. And people, you know, the next question is, well, how do you use it? Well, you can use it in place of dairy or something like that. If it was in a batter, it could take the place of that. In place of water, like if you made an apple crisp, it would be ridiculously good to take your apples and just take a bottle of beer and pour it right over it, let it sit in there for a while, and then strain it off. Don't get rid of that because it's probably delicious if you just drink it. And then you can soak them in that, and then, you know, make your apple crisp from there. So you can use it. You can use beer in a lot of ways in desserts too. I always find that it's fun, and you know, being a pastry chef, one thing I always aimed for was making desserts that weren't weird but were interesting, if that makes sense. You don't want people to think, oh my god, that's going to be terrible. But if you tell people, hey, you know, we made, I don't know, a stout ice cream or an amber ice cream, they're in it. It's like, it's not a hard sell at all. So people get pretty excited about that for sure. All right, these guys are looking pretty good. Start a couple plates here.
Your use of malt as a process is an interesting to think about today. I would think that would work well in beef sauces.
Beef, yeah, absolutely. Pork, ridiculously well. Malt and pork, they are really, really good together. Pork inherently takes well to sweet sauces. And so malt, again, the reason why I think it's so interesting was one, it has a great flavor, but it's not overly sweet, right? It's not like crazy brown sugar or anything like that. And it brings a lot of flavor already to the So the lime, if you'll notice, I waited to the end, and it brightens everything up a lot. I'm gonna flip the next one. This one will have cilantro. No. Yay! All right, we'll put some jalapeno on, a little bit of our green onion, and then a good dose of cilantro on the top of that. Just a little bit of seeds. So if you guys want to come up, we'll have a little utensil here. There's some plates right here. You can serve yourself. Grab one. It also gives me more time to plate up the rest of the shrimp. I love hard cider is probably my number one beverage. I use it in desserts and in savory as well. Again, that pork thing, like hard cider and pork.
Yeah, I was thinking of raising like a pork.
Yeah.
Really good.
Pork butt would be, yeah, I'd recommend pork butt with it. Yep, absolutely. And it works out really, really well. Without any cilantro. Do you enjoy hot peppers?
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a cilantro.
It's not cilantro. Okay, cool.
I've been careful for my relatives. We're like, they don't. It's all about her.
Cool.
Even when we still think it's hot, they think it's hot.
Yeah.
So we have to get like.
It's just fun.
Yeah.
Bring some of these over to you guys. It's pretty informal. There you go. Just put some more other stuff. No, that's my baby. Yeah, I had one that was given to me from, Jeff asked me to do morning moto with you that night. I had one a long time ago and it actually got stolen in Las Vegas. I was doing a cooking competition there. And so it's one of the, I don't don't know, gluttonous things. I spent a little money on it. It's nice though. It's like working with razor blade.
What's it like working for Mike?
What is it like working for Mike? Well, I guess I can lead the interlude first. We'll talk about Mike first because Mike's awesome. The person that you see on TV is pretty much the person that he is. Might be embellished just a touch because it's TV, but yeah, he's an incredible person. It was an incredible chef to work for. One, super intelligent. Not just about food. Yes, he's intelligent about food, but the hospitality at a lot of the restaurants was always first and foremost, and you don't see that from a lot of chefs. You don't see, like, you walk into one of Mike's restaurants, Mike's not going to say hi, he's going to be like, hi, do you want a drink? That's the first thing, right? And here we are, the people show us the drinks, right? That's what happens. And so super intelligent. Working in those restaurants was tough. It was busy and grinding and, high expectations and all of those things. But, I was the corporate pastry chef of the company, and it was interesting because I was given a lot of freedom and a lot of leeway, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. And really, like, if I look back at my career, that's kind of where I found myself. That's where I found who I was as a cook, who I was as a manager, what I was good at, what I wasn't good at. And so there were some times that I'd fall down, but by the end of it all, I felt very confident in the chef and the cook and the manager that I was. And you find a lot of your strengths, and you find your weaknesses. And another great thing about working for Mike too is he was never afraid to admit his own weaknesses. He was never like the screaming chef who was always perfect or any of those things. But instead, he just surrounded himself with brilliant, intelligent people that were good at what he wasn't good at. And so when I talk about Mike, it goes beyond just the chefdom into like the guy's really intelligent. He's also a business person. They just opened up another restaurant like a month ago at the Palms in Las Vegas, and then 2 days ago at the Palms in Las Vegas too. They opened up 2 brand new restaurants. So he was a very interesting person to work for. Still a good friend, good person all in all. I get to take this off now. Any other questions about food? Yeah, we're right on time. I figured that would kind of happen.
So do you cater?
What's that? I've not gotten into the catering world, and I don't think that, again, a tax-based place would like me coming in and using their facilities for that. But privately, sometimes they'll show up to people who doesn't cook. That's a different story altogether. It's kind of fun. Definitely a fun atmosphere. If you have not had the chance, how's the shrimp?
Really good.
Good. I'm actually going to eat some of that too. You guys can get some too. Would you like some? If you haven't got a chance to take a look around the school at all, I know we talked about kind of, yeah, you're fine. Bouncing around, checking out the brewing class that's going on upstairs. There were a whole lot of high schoolers upstairs. We actually hosted a regional cooking competition for high schoolers today.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if they're all still up there or not.
They're pretty much wrapped down.
Yeah, I think it was probably a bit maniacal at one point up there. Yeah, so that's that. Any other questions?
Can you plug our restaurants?
Yes, I will plug the rest. So bad at plugging the school. So we do have 2 restaurants over in the that are student-run restaurants. One's called the Havermill Cafe. That one is run Monday through Thursday from 11 to
11:30 to 1.
11:30 to 1. Thank you. 11:30 to 1. I don't teach down there.
You want me to plug our restaurant?
Tracy's in that class right now. 11:30 to 1. It's right when you first come in the door. There's a small cafe, so they'll have a daily rotational menu. They also have a grab and go style, so sandwiches, salads, things of that nature. Soup. There's a small buffet there too. They just started selling also some of the produce from the FIC, the Food Innovation Center, is actually for sale there as well. Hopefully one day there will be canned beer for sale, which would be, that would be crazy. The other restaurant that we have is the 418 restaurant. It is our dinner service restaurant, and it opens at 6 o'clock.
They take reservations 6 and 7.
6 and 7 are the reservations.
Tuesday, Thursday.
Yes, Tuesdays and Thursdays currently is when it's open right now. It is fully student run, incredibly affordable. Both restaurants are like absurdly affordable, but because we can't charge for labor, that's basically what it boils down to.
There's some cards over there. The Facebook
Perfect.
pages show the menus, so if you're interested, dinner's phenomenal.
Yeah, it is really, really
Pretty
great.
busy?
And it's, what's that?
Busy, I mean, reservations, they did
They,
that.
they want reservations
Yeah.
if you can.
Highly recommended for the reservation. Now, that doesn't mean you can't call the day off, that's fine, but highly recommended for reservations, especially, I taught that class once, reservations are great, as for a teacher's sake, because you're like, okay, this is what we can do today, instead of like, oh my god, there's 45 extra people. So, it's a 3-course menu, and it changes with specials, the desserts change as well, and they focus on, I got a lot of local and seasonal. Chef Joe Boone is the teacher of the class right now. I'm actually like to come in later this month with my wife. Maybe. I've never dined at my own school.
All right, before everybody gets going and takes the tour and everything, I'm gonna go ahead and do 2 things. First, we're gonna do the drawing for the prize. And so on that sheet, if you wanna go and pull one of those out there. No interference here. All right. Nancy Mitchell. All right.
You get to take all the rest of the print home?
Yeah. There you go. Congrats. All right. What everybody think? You like this one?
Yeah.
Pretty awesome, huh?
Cool.
Are you
Promise
this
it will be
program
sick
again
next
next
year.
year? Yeah. I'm already talking them into it.